I never thought a letter could change everything. But as I stood there in the early morning sun, the dew still clinging to the blades of grass under my boots, I held in my hands the one thing that told me it was time. An envelope. Thick, cream-colored, official-looking. My name typed clean across the front, Walter Grady. I didn't open it right away. My hands, calloused from decades of building and fixing what others tossed aside, trembled slightly. Not from weakness, just a feeling I hadn't had in a long time, fury mixed with dread. When I finally tore it open, my gut dropped.
$52,000.
That's what they said I owed. Not the IRS. Not the bank. The Homeowners Association. Led by none other than Nancy Whitmore, the self-appointed queen of Woodland Pines. My crime? My fence. The same cedar plank fence my father built with his bare hands more than 50 years ago. The same fence that had withstood storms, dry summers, and time itself. The HOA called it unsightly. Said it violated neighborhood aesthetics. And now, they were threatening to foreclose on my home if I didn't cough up 50 grand within 30 days. I stood there, clutching the letter, heart pounding. This wasn't about paint or landscaping. This was about control. Nancy and her clipboard army had been after me for months. Petty complaints, warning letters, fines that came like clockwork. My lawn wasn't perfectly manicured. My barn, the one I inherited, had a rusty hinge. They even fined me $1,000 because a tree branch hung too low over the sidewalk. It wasn't enforcement. It was harassment. I let it all slide. I'm not one for drama. After my wife passed 2 years ago, I mostly kept to myself. Fixed things around the house. Took care of the garden. Walked my old dog Daisy through the back fields. I didn't bother anyone. But this letter, this crossed the line.
$52,000.
For a fence. Or they'd take my home. I looked up at the fence, sun-bleached but sturdy, and thought of my father. He built this land with his sweat and grit. Now they wanted to erase it for uniformity and power. What they didn't know, what they never bothered to find out, was that I wasn't just some old relic they could bully. You see, the HNA made one fatal mistake. They assumed the road that led into Woodland Pines, the very path every single resident used to get in and out, belonged to the city. But it didn't. It belonged to me. My father kept the deed when he sold the land back in the 70s. Developers bought the plots, laid down asphalt, built cookie-cutter houses, but they never bothered to ask about the access road. It was private property. My property. I let it be. For years, I said nothing. Let them use the road. Never asked for a dime. But now they'd poked the bear. I crumpled the letter in my fist and tossed it in the trash. I wasn't paying a damn cent. They wanted a war? Fine. I'd show them who really owned Woodland Pines. And it wasn't Nancy Whitmore. It was Walter Grady. After throwing that letter in the trash, I didn't storm into the HOA office or shout from my porch. That's not my style. I learned long ago that real power doesn't need to yell. It just needs to wait for the right moment. I spent the next few days in my shed, pulling out old boxes coated in dust. Inside were yellowing papers, brittle with age. Deeds, maps, my father's notes. Every scrap of documentation proving ownership of the narrow stretch of asphalt the neighborhood took for granted. That road? It wasn't public. It never was. It was the lifeline in and out of Woodland Pines, and it sat on land that belonged solely to me. My father had warned me this might happen someday. Keep the papers, he said. One day, someone will forget who really built this place. He was right. The developers didn't ask questions back then. They just paid for the lots, paved over our pasture, and assumed everything they touched was theirs, including the road. But we never signed it over. For decades, I kept that fact to myself. Let the neighborhood come and go as it pleased. I wasn't interested in playing gatekeeper. Until Nancy Whitmore decided to make me her personal enemy. She thought I was a weak old man clinging to a rundown home. She thought I didn't have the money, the knowledge, or the backbone to stand up to her rules and regulations. But I had something more powerful than any bylaw she could throw at me: leverage. Still, I wasn't going to do this alone. I picked up the phone and called David Martin. He used to be a wide-eyed intern in the city engineer's office back when I consulted there. Now, he was a respected property lawyer in the county. one of the few who still believed in fairness. He showed up at my door 2 days later with a notepad and raised eyebrow. "You really own the only road into Woodland Pines?" he asked, stunned. I handed him the documents. He flipped through them, whistling low under his breath. "Well," he said with a grin, "I hope Nancy's ready to eat a big slice of humble pie." We got to work. David began drafting a formal cease and desist against the HOA. We prepared for what might come next: court filings, public records, even a potential injunction against further enforcement actions. Meanwhile, I started noticing something different in the neighborhood. Whispers. Cars slowing down as they passed my house. People crossing the street just to avoid eye contact. Some, though, began to smile at me, just barely. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Folks who'd stayed silent while Nancy fined them for mailbox color, garden gnomes, and forgotten trash cans. They'd seen the letters. Heard about the fine. They knew something was happening. And they were watching. That's when the intimidation started. It began with 2 men in black HOA-branded jackets showing up on my lawn, claiming they were there to inspect my property. They didn't ask. They told. "You failed to meet the standards," one of them said, smug and bored, like he delivered the same line 100 times before. I looked him dead in the eye. "You don't have permission to be here." He smirked. "You'll regret this, old man." They left, but I knew it was just the beginning. The next morning, they bulldozed part of my fence. No notice. No permit. Just splinters and silence. Later that week, my dog Daisy disappeared. I searched for hours in the dark. I didn't sleep. She was found the next day, locked in a van with other neighbors' pets. That's when it became clear, this wasn't about rules. It was war. They weren't just trying to find me. They were trying to break me. But I don't break. I build. And this time, I was building a case that would tear their empire down. They say power doesn't corrupt, it reveals. Well, Nancy Whitmore had revealed enough. After Daisy was returned, shaken but alive, I thought maybe they'd back off. That maybe someone on that board had a shred of decency left. But I was wrong. They weren't done. Not by a long shot. A few mornings later, just as I was pouring my first cup of coffee, a utility truck rolled up to my house. Big white thing, HOA logo slapped on the side like it meant something. 4 men climbed out, none of them smiling. I stepped onto the porch and called out, "What's this about?" The lead guy didn't even look at me. Just read from a clipboard. "Water and power shutoff, per HOA directive. Non-compliance with neighborhood standards. This is the first step in the enforcement process." My stomach dropped. "You're here to turn off my utilities?" I asked. He finally looked at me then. No apology in his eyes. Just the dull certainty of a man following orders. "That's correct, sir." It was the final straw. They were trying to make my house unlivable. Trying to force me out. Starve me of basic needs so I'd cave and sign whatever settlement Nancy wanted. But they didn't understand something very important. I'm not afraid of the dark. I've lived through worse. So I nodded, turned around, and walked back into the house, straight to the shed. Same place I kept my tools, my plans, my father's old equipment. The smell of oil and pine dust wrapped around me like armor. I grabbed the wrench I'd used for 30 years, the one with a nick in the handle from when it slipped fixing a neighbor's well pump back in '92. If they were going to cut me off, I'd beat them to it. I went to the meter, shut off my own power, disconnected the supply line, then sealed the pipe valves tight and safe. I'd done it before. I could live off the grid if I had to. Rainwater tanks, solar batteries. Heck, I still had the generator my father rigged after the blackout of '88. By the time they realized what I'd done, they were already packing up, confused and annoyed. One of them mumbled something about legal consequences. I didn't care. I stood in the driveway and watched them leave, the sun beating down on my bare arms, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. They wanted to make me desperate. Instead, they made me dangerous. Word spread fast after that. Some neighbors started asking questions, quietly, cautiously. A few came by to drop off groceries. One brought firewood. Even people I hadn't seen in years nodded as they walked by. They weren't speaking openly yet, but they were watching. Nancy knew it too. So she escalated again. She called an emergency HOA meeting. Claimed it was for neighborhood integrity. Sent flyers door to door. Summoned every homeowner in Woodland Pines. She was going to make an example out of me. But I had my own plans. You see, while she was busy rallying her army, I was stacking my ammunition, deeds, maps, signatures, the original agreement from 1974 that proved I owned the one road in and out of the community. I also had David preparing an injunction. Real legal action, not the hollow threats Nancy was used to issuing. And I had something she didn't.
The truce.
That meeting? It wasn't going to be her show. It was going to be mine. The day before it, I stood on my porch, sipping sweet tea, watching the sun set behind the trees my father planted 50 years ago. And I smiled. Because I knew something she didn't. She thought she'd backed me into a corner. But she'd just handed me the stage. The community center smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. It always had. But that night, the air inside was thick, like static before a thunderstorm. Nancy Whitmore stood at the front of the room, in her signature cream blazer and clipped smile, flipping through her binder like she was preparing a closing argument in court. The place was packed. Every seat filled, neighbors standing in the back, some whispering, others just watching. Waiting. They didn't know what they were here for, not really. Nancy had painted it as a matter of order. Said I was endangering the community's integrity. Said I was refusing to cooperate. That this meeting would determine the next steps. She thought she was about to bury me. But she didn't bring a shovel. I did. I sat in the back row, as calm as a man could be. David sat beside me, a leather briefcase on his lap, fingers steepled. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. When Nancy finally called the meeting to order, her voice rang out with that practiced HOA confidence. Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, we've had ongoing compliance issues with Mr. Walter Grady. His refusal to adhere to standards has escalated. I stood up. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just stood. The room fell silent.
Nancy blinked.
Mr. Grady, if you'll allow me to finish. No, I said. Just that one word. But it was enough to stop her cold.
He walked to the front slowly, my steps even, steady.
When I reached the podium, I turned, not to face her, but to face the room. My name is Walter Grady, I began. Some of you know me. Some of you think you know me. And a few of you have avoided me because you're scared of getting in trouble for even talking to me. That ends tonight. A few murmurs. I reached into my jacket, pulled out a thick file, and laid it on the table between Nancy and me. These, I said, tapping the folder, are the original property deeds, signed and recorded in 1974. They include one very important document. Ownership of the access road into Woodland Pines. The only road in.
The only road out.
Nancy froze. The HOA has been operating under the assumption that this road was public, I continued, voice firm. But it's not. It never was. My father kept it. I inherited it. And now you've been trying to fine me, threaten me, and cut off my utilities, on property that you have no legal right to control. The silence in that room could have split a tree. David opened the briefcase and handed out copies of the deeds to the board members. One by one, their faces drained of color. This isn't about offense, I said. This is about control. It's about bullying. And I won't be bullied.
Nancy's voice cracked.
This isn't possible. That can't be enforceable. It already is, David said calmly. Filed this morning with the county clerk. We're also filing for an injunction against further HOA actions until this is resolved legally, including the fine. People in the crowd looked at each other, whispers building into waves. Then, out of nowhere, Mavis stood up.
You know ma vie, the key widow from down the street.
She raised her voice for the first time in years. I've lived here 33 years, she said. And I'm tired of being scared to plant tomatoes in my own yard.
Walter, I'm with you.
And just like that, the room broke open. One by one, neighbors stood. Some apologizing for staying quiet. Others telling their own stories. Fines for hanging flags, for having too many garden lights, for letting their kid chalk on the sidewalk.
The illusion of control cracked.
Nancy tried to speak again, But no one was listening. Her power wasn't being challenged, it was gone. And all it took was the truth in the hands of the one man they thought would never fight back.
The next morning, he woke up before the sun.
Not from anger this time, but peace. That deep, still kind of peace you only feel after standing your ground. Nancy never called the meeting to a proper close. She couldn't. By the end, even her own board members wouldn't look her in the eye. The room had emptied slowly, some in silence, others in quiet, shocked murmurs, like people walking out of a long dark spell. But I wasn't finished. I brewed my coffee, pulled on my boots, and walked out to the edge of the neighborhood, the entrance where the only road into Woodland Pines met the county line. And I did something I'd never thought I'd have to do. I put up a sign. A large hand-painted plank of cedar, nailed into 2 fence posts just like the ones my father had used. Private property. Road access temporarily suspended. Liability concerns. Contact W. Grady for permission. That's all it said. No threats. No gates.
Just the truth.
Within hours, the neighborhood was in chaos. Delivery vans stalled. School buses backed up. Residents late for work sat bumper to bumper with their hazard lights blinking. HOA board members trapped in their driveways. All of Woodland Pines, held up by a road they never owned. Nancy called me that afternoon. Her voice didn't have that bite anymore.
No reste contrôle.
Just panic dressed as diplomacy. Walter, she said, we need to talk. I smiled. You'll have to go through my lawyer. And she did. Red-faced and gritted-teethed, she met David in mediation. My terms were clear and simple. Immediate cancellation of the $50,000 fine. A public apology from Nancy Whitmore at the next community gathering. Her resignation as HOA president, effective immediately. The HOA board dissolved and replaced by a volunteer resident council with limited powers. And finally, a symbolic $1 per year lease agreement for use of the road, renewable annually, at my discretion. At first, they resisted. But it wasn't up to Nancy anymore. The residents had seen enough. They were tired of the rules, the fear, the threats. They wanted their neighborhood back.
Nancy stepped down.
At the next community meeting, she stood behind the same microphone where she once ruled with absolute authority. I apologize, she said, eyes low. To Mr. Grady. And to the residents of Woodland Pines. I recognize that under my leadership, the HOA caused unnecessary hardship. Effective today, I resign.
No applause. Just silence.
And that was enough. I didn't gloat. I didn't puff my chest. I just nodded and quietly walked out the back door. That moment wasn't about victory, it was about freedom. In the weeks that followed, Woodland Pines changed. The new resident council, no fancy titles, no dress codes, turned the HOA into what it should have been all along, a group of neighbors helping neighbors.
Fin.
Gone. Rules became suggestions. Kids started riding bikes again. Dogs barked.
Beurre sang. Gardens bloomed.
And nobody got a violation letter in the mail. As for me, I rebuilt the fence. Not with plastic slats or HOA-approved white paint. No, I used reclaimed cedar, weathered and warm, just like my father once did. On one post, I carved a small inscription. Built by my father. Defended by his son. A few days later, Mavis came by with a basket of peach cobbler.
She stood next to me, eyeing the fence, smiling softly.
You showed them, she said.
I sipped my tea.
Didn't need to shout, Mavis. Just had to show them what quiet folks do when they've had enough. We sat on the porch, listening to the wind in the trees. Kids were laughing down the road.
The air was light again. The kind you could breathe without clenching your jaw.
That afternoon, a group of kids from the neighborhood stopped by. They wanted to learn how to build a birdhouse like the ones hanging from my porch. I chuckled and led them to the shed, the same one where I once prepared for war. This time, I opened it for something else. Legacy.
Not revenge.
Not pride. Just the act of teaching. Of passing something down. Because this land, this road, this fence, they weren't just mine. They were pieces of a bigger truth. That justice doesn't always come from a courtroom, a badge, or a politician. Sometimes, it starts with a quiet man in overalls who just says enough.